Hello, everyone, and welcome to Research Security and the Impact of AI, addressing evolving challenges to safeguarding, ethics, and compliance. This is a Times Higher Education webinar in partnership with Digital Science. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the Head of Branded Content at THE, and I will be chairing today's discussion. As technology continues to reshape research practices, ensuring research security has become increasingly complex. From data security and regulatory changes to ethical dilemmas and concerns about AI, universities must navigate new and fast evolving challenges. Innovative technological solutions are evolving alongside these issues, however, and are enabling institutions to proactively address their different stakeholders' concerns. Today, our panel from industry and academia will discuss how institutions can confront these growing challenges in research security and its related issues. The panelists will present examples of successful research security measures implemented at their institutions and discuss strategies for managing risks in the future. There will be an opportunity to put questions to the panel during the final 5 or 10 minutes of the hour that we have scheduled. So please feel free to write any questions in the box in Zoom, and we will answer as many as possible before the end. There will also be a full recording of this webinar published on the THE website alongside a summary article should you wish to revisit this discussion or share it with colleagues. A link to the recording and the article will be emailed to everyone in the audience post-event. So to begin, I would like to introduce our panel today. Thank you all for joining us. They are Leslie McIntosh, who's Vice President of Research Integrity at Digital Science, Shannon O'Reilly, who is Product Sales Team Lead at Digital Science, Eduardo Alonso, who is Director of the Artificial Intelligence Research Centre at City University of London, Chetali Desai, who is Head of Research Compliance at the University of Bristol, and Martha Wallace, who is Director of Research Security at University of Calgary. I will hand over to you first, Leslie, so you can take us through your presentation and put this in context for us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you all for those who are attending. So I'm Leslie McIntosh, and while my background is in biomedical informatics, and I come from public health, I've moved into research integrity and research security, and I'm very happy to bring us into a bigger picture of what's going on in the ecosystem. So just conceptually, we have a polluted information river at this point. It's difficult to understand both what we should trust, what is real, what we shouldn't trust. And I think with the opening of science and the opening of research, we have been challenged with, in our ecosystem, we've been challenged with understanding the scaffolding of trust that goes around that, which has caused a lot of challenges. Now, this is all in the context of the greater environment that's going on in the world, science, and I do use the 2,000-year-old definition of science. It's very inclusive of what I'm talking about in the research ecosystem. It's challenged right now because we have changed the rules of how things work while the world has been changing with us, and yet we need to look at what is a clean river, what is good information, and what is the security around that in particular in this topic, and how does AI affect that? So what's polluting the information river here? Now, a lot of people have been focused on social media, and absolutely that has changed the way that information has progressed. Like I already said, open science has changed the way that we get information. It changes who has access to the information so that then who can put information back in. But we're also seeing just a lot of other garbage come in through different mechanisms. We have authorship for sale, where the author of the paper, of a research paper, just buys it. They don't actually do the work. There are citation cartels because, of course, if you are going to have a paper, you need to have it cited. So then there are cartels of people who cite paper, and there are different mechanisms in which to get those papers cited. There's peer review manipulation. Again, this ties into you buy a paper, you need to get it cited. Well, to get the paper published in a peer-reviewed journal, then there needs to be some sort of manipulation in order for that to happen. There's editors who are being bribed. There's ideological alignment among authors and funders. I think the tobacco industry is probably a very good example of this. There's people not disclosing conflicts of interest, and there are many, many more on each one of these. I could go through authorship and talk about how we have an ecosystem where there are fake authors out there. Now, why are people doing this? Why is this going on? I think a lot of the attention has been on individual gains, in that individuals, so I'd say this is within the tent of science, if you will, are motivated in order to get promoted, right? And there are perverse incentives, and I'm not going into that, but there's a lot of information on that. But as already mentioned, there's ideological promotion. There are reasons for companies, there are reasons for groups of people who want to put things, their opinions forward without it having actual scientific bases. And then there's geopolitical interference on what's going on in science. So that's where research security comes in from a global scale. I'm not talking about at your institution. Other people on the panel will talk about that. But there are geopolitical reasons that Shannon's going to give some examples on. So I will stop there before I even go. But I want to just talk about, how does AI fit into this? There are threats to research, the fabrication of research-like content, undermining our shared ability to recognize fact from fiction. And I would argue that what AI does is makes this effortless fabrication of research-like content. And that's where we need to focus, and what we'll hear more about. I argue that individual cleanup is not enough, that we need a coordinated cleanup and monitoring of the system in order to better trust our research ecosystem. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Leslie. That's good for getting us started. Shannon, we can hand over to you, please.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Shannon O'Reilly. Like Leslie, I'm with Digital Science, and I am a product specialist with Dimensions. And today I'm going to be talking about research security, but from that geopolitical perspective, and how we as a vendor approach this topic and where our responsibility lies, especially as it relates to partnering with other academic institutions and research security professionals. We're all at this webinar, so we probably all have an idea of kind of what's going on and what's at stake. Before I begin, I just want to emphasize that we all want scientific research to be as open and collaborative as possible. And the majority of research partnerships have transparent intentions. However, some activities by foreign governments, militaries, and other actors can pose real risks to national security and the integrity of the research ecosystem. And over time, the risks associated with research security have become more dynamic and more complex. We see poor adherence to government funder and compliance mandates, and that can put academic institutions at the risk if they don't comply. And they can face fines, penalties, and reputational loss. And we see this in the growing news stories that have been released recently and over the past couple of years. And so research security is under increased scrutiny by government and funders across the world. And there are a host of mandatory and emerging research security requirements. And universities have to increasingly take proactive measures to assess institutional risks, verifying disclosures, and reviewing researcher networks. And for many, it's a new and challenging landscape to navigate. It's also rapidly changing. And so the complexity of these issues, combined with the vast networks of research activity, that data pollution river that Leslie kind of laid out for us, means that institutions really can't go at it alone. And this is where we as a data and analytical solutions provider come in. Dimensions is, for those that are not familiar with us, is a linked database with a mission to provide users with as much important and timely data as possible. while also providing tools that empower users to make their own discoveries and their own analysis. And when it comes to research security, it's essential to have as much information as possible. And this is when Dimension's mission really aligns well with those of the research security professional. And it's in that we want an inclusive approach. We're aiming to provide the largest set of data possible, not an exclusionary one. And we believe users are in the best position to determine what's important for themselves and their organization, which is even more critical, again, for research security. It's worth noting that Dimensions, and particular Dimensions web application, Dimensions Analytics, wasn't created for research security. Dimensions data has wide applications across the university, for governments, publishing organizations, as well as corporate organizations. But due to this robust data across multiple content types like publications, data sets, grants, clinical trials, patents, and policies, we became a really good partner for this research security area. And so we started working with academic research security professionals in 2019. And we saw that users in this space found Dimensions data really critical for their work. And it led to an advisory group of research security users that helped us in the development of what is now the Dimensions Research Security app. And this was created in response to that increasing demand for additional analytical capability that wasn't currently available in Dimensions Analytics, because again, it wasn't made for research security. And so with the Dimensions Research Security app, users can easily see and evaluate data associated with their institution in order to inform risk assessment. And the app also provides enhanced researcher profiles that help surface information like dual affiliations and published research cited in patents. So it's really, again, optimizing all of that data to help make that user experience, especially for research security, as easy and as kind of transparent and discoverable as possible. And just to give a quick preview of kind of what this is and what we developed in this partnership is an app that enables users to drill down by various filters that are made specifically for this research security use case. It's to look at collaborations that require disclosure and or maybe considered high risk as one example. And so we have filters like by flagged organization list, which is working again closely with this international research security to pull in list information and keywords that's going to be particularly relevant for them and allow them to find that kind of needle in the haystack. This is just a kind of a screenshot of our application, but it's broken up into two sections. And the intent of kind of the first piece of this application, the home organization, is to really help surface potential areas of interest for research security on an organizational level. And this includes insights into authors publishing with multiple affiliations, publications with co-authors from their home organization that mention keywords of interest like talent recruitment programs and analysis of international collaborations. And then our second piece is really just about digging into the researchers that are within Dimensions. And this includes affiliations over time, collaborations past and present, and the researcher publications and funding. So all of this really with the goal of just understanding all of the activity happening at your institution, what's also happening across the research ecosystem as it relates to researchers. And so just to wrap it up, I just want to kind of conclude and say, the landscape of research security, it's a rapidly developing space. And because of this, we know that open communication with this community is essential. And so as a data and solutions provider, we recognize that the responsibility we hold in developing a tool in such a sensitive and high stakes space, it's really important that we listen to our users and we empower them with as much data as possible, but in a way that's going to be easy to find and use to save them time and to make sure that the decisions they feel will best protect and safeguard the research at their organization is possible with data. And so with that, I will pass it on. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Shannon. We've had a question about asking if the slides will be shareable from today. I'm sure if we can arrange, the slides will be viewable as part of the on-demand recording that we will share with you after the session. But if there's a particular deck, that if you just let the panelists know in the Q&A, and we will consolidate that with the registration list to try and get those sent out to you afterwards. So Eduardo, without further ado, if we could hand over to you, please, you could tell us about your work and how AI is impacting on it.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, as you have introduced me already, I am Professor Eduardo Alonso, from Director of the Artificial Intelligence Research Center at City University of London, actually City St. George's now. We have just merged the two universities recently. And obviously, as a representative of a university, the question that I want to address very briefly in this meeting is the following one. As an educational institution, how can we teach students to do secure research during their studies and beyond as computer scientists, that is what I do, and technology developers, okay? So the very first answer to this particular question might be a cynical one, saying, okay, look, technology at the end of the day is neutral. It's pretty much what the users do. That is especially true, we can actually argue with GPTs. GPTs, I don't mean, the new technology in artificial intelligence, but actually artificial intelligence as such, as a general purpose technology. So the argument goes as follows. If we don't know, if these technologies are general purpose, we don't know in advance what the applications might be. So it's eventually up to the user to decide how they are going to use them, and therefore to make them secure. And this is obviously a quite cynical kind of approach to the problem, because obviously it's not only about making sure that we can use securely and for the public say this technology, but it's about how to develop secure technology securely. So we actually go probably to the other extreme when we get to this particular point, how to develop a secure technology rather than how to use a technology in a secure way. And typically the answer is the following. Obviously, there are some kind of regulations that, the European Commission of the British government, of the American government have come up with, and apologies for that. And that, as educators, what we do is basically tell the students that they have to follow them. That, is some kind of a list that they have to tick every time they actually try to develop any kind of technology, particularly artificial intelligence technology. That is, the answer is, these are the norms and the standards in your profession as a software developer or as an artificial intelligence technologist or whatever. And that's what you have to do. And this is okay. This is something that obviously a professional in this particular field, so they have to go through as any other kind of profession. They have their own normative systems, but it's not quite enough. Why is not enough? Because these norms and standards typically are for the general application. And the problem is when you actually are developing technology and you are working with different clients, with different owners, with different people, obviously they have all the very specific requirements to meet. And therefore the norms and standards become some kind of guidances, but they are not actually enough to tell you what you have or what you can or cannot do. This actually, my first degree is in philosophy, actually, and is what the Greeks called, and the approach that you have to follow at this particular point is, phronesis, that is translated into Latin as prudentia. As you can imagine, obviously, is where, prudence actually comes from in English. And this is precisely the point. We need norms and standards of general guidance, but then people have, the developers themselves had to use their wisdom in action in order to figure out what is the way to develop their technology in a secure way. Put it another way, there is no way around the point of the professionals themselves when they are being educated to be ethically responsible and accountable. We cannot actually just refer them to a particular regulation by the British government or by the European Commission or whatever. Okay, eventually, they need to be ethically responsible and accountable for how they actually use these norms and apply them in very specific cases according to the requirements. And one way of doing that, in which artificial intelligence actually can help, is by designing computational systems that align with our values. So we're talking here about values rather than norms, okay? And this is precisely a very hot area of research that we're involved in the center, but other people obviously are, not only in the United Kingdom, but in other countries are working on, and how to develop technology, artificial intelligence technology, that actually aligns the kind of decisions they make on our behalf to our values on a embedded kind of way, in a situated way, in a case-by-case case scenario. Finishing just my little talk, this doesn't mean, by the way, that that artificial intelligence, even though they can help us by doing that, that doesn't mean that we can delegate into the artificial intelligence tool application of a device of model, call it the way you wish, that we are working with along the lines that I have just described as a moral decision makers. Okay, and technology they don't have morals, and therefore trying to define artificial intelligence systems as autonomous systems that can actually act autonomously in a moral sense is just a trap, really. Eventually, it's always a human being who is in control in one way or another, and we are always eventually those who are responsible and accountable. Okay, so this is, I think, the end of it. Thank you very much for the attention.
Excellent, thank you, Eduardo. There's some interesting points there that we'll dive into when we get to the discussion part of the webinar that's coming up. But Chaitali, if I can ask you to go next, please. So if you can tell us more about how this AI is impacting the work that you do, and also how it's integrated with your areas of expertise.
Sure. I will share my screen so that you can see the slides. And hopefully that has come through.
Yes.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about how research security impact and the impact of AI is relevant to not just the University of Bristol, but to higher education institutions in the research compliance space that we work in. When we talk about AI, we are not necessarily just talking about the use of AI as a tool. We also talk about it in the context of the legislation that we manage. So my team looks at the regulatory obligations arising from export control, from the National Security and Investment Act, and from trusted research principles. And there are elements of both the export control regulations and the National Security and Investment Act that are solely dedicated to AI and seeing it as a threat. So we've spoken about it a lot as an opportunity today, and it really is. We've got a lot of help from AI in automation of processes and in helping us manage an increasing workload that is impossible with a very small team that we have. But from the legislative perspective, we are being spoken to by government and regulators about it from the space of it being where our research is less secure. So in the areas of artificial intelligence, there are hostile nations that the government and regulators will tell us that they are using AI and using the work that we do to it's almost like using it as a springboard to develop their own work at higher speed. So whilst it is something that is really important to contribute to and really important to the sector as a whole, we also have to look at it from the perspective that if you've got somebody doing research that involves an element of AI, this will bring in part of legislation that we now have to start complying with. There are areas of research which wouldn't necessarily have been caught by regulations such as the ones that I've mentioned. Things like talking about climate change and soil change and things that don't sound like they're risky areas of research. But the use of AI within that research potentially can bring it in scope of being caught by the National Security and Investment Act and potentially in export control as well. So whilst as I said, that this is why I said that we see it as both an opportunity to make the way that we work more efficient and more productive and more intuitive. It also is I use the word threat loosely, but it is something that we have to be mindful of when other hostile nations or other companies and other states that we don't necessarily want to have our work are using it to take it from us. Why AI is a security risk for us? It's inherently dual use. It's very easy to repurpose. When we're talking about something that is quite low, we refer to them as TRL levels, technology readiness levels. The use of AI can immediately bring that up much higher up the chain, which makes it much more attractive to other countries and other institutions to use that work, because they can repurpose it for something that our academics may not necessarily have thought it was relevant to. It's listed in one of the 17 sectors of the economy in the National Security and Investment Act. So that legislation focuses on 17 areas of the economy which they see are higher risk, in the sense that the research happening in those areas are more prone to whether it's proliferation or a misuse or anything like that, and AI is one sector within that. It's also a key area of risk under the export control regulations, as I said. Because of its expanding impact in both the STEM and the non-STEM research areas, it also means that we as a team are seeing a much greater volume of having to review cases they're not projects that we would have had to look at before. We talk about end user concerns. So we're talking about countries that are being described by the government and by regulators as high risk, such as China, Russia, and Iran. And where we're doing research that's not STEM, that involves a level of AI, but we wouldn't ordinarily be concerned about it, where we are working with those high-risk nations, the government is saying to us, you need to be very careful or be very protective of your IP and your research outputs and your research deliverables, because they are at a greater risk. There's having to have some acknowledgement of the fact that there are entities that wouldn't necessarily define as AI-driven, but the use of AI, because it's so easily repurposed, means that research that wouldn't ordinarily have fallen within scope is becoming so on a more and more regular basis. Compliance in itself in most HEIs is a less mature function than some of the more established areas, such as research contracts or research governance or impact development, for example. So whilst we're using AI in a really helpful way to help us assess legal, financial, and reputation risk, we're also finding that we are working in an area of developing law that's moving at fast pace, and AI is one of the areas within it that's moving at a really fast pace, but we're not tooled to be able to do so because teams in HEIs dealing with this kind of work are still quite small, and we're learning as we go in the same way that regulators and governments seem to be learning as they go too. The impact of getting this wrong, of research going through which shouldn't necessarily have gone through or not being assessed as a risk which should have been, can result in civil fines, criminal sanctions, loss of competitive advantage, and that's very, very important, certainly in the space of AI. Quantum communications is another one, other telecommunications. There is a significant drive from government to ensure we protect our competitive advantage, and so that's something that we're always quite focused on. National security resilience. The loss of research funding is something that academics, we are constantly having to discuss with academics, that research funders are becoming more and more attuned to the need to be aware of risk areas in research. And if we are not if we're not able to show them that we have this covered, we've got our processes in place, we're doing all the right due diligence, then they are inclined to say that either they will withhold research grant funding, or they will say we want to remove particular partners because we see that they present a particular risk. And that loss of research funding, it's the bread and butter of a lot of universities, so that's quite serious to them. And then on top of that, you've got the reputation harm to both the academics and to the institution. Shannon shared some of the slides, some of the pictures of the headlines, and we see many of those. And it's a constant, it's referred to in universities as the Daily Mail test. No university wants to be on the front page of the Daily Mail with this idea that this university has been working in AI or in quantum or in any other area with institutions that we don't necessarily want to be aligned with. But having that control over our work, the advent of, not just the advent, the development of AI is making that more and more, not necessarily difficult, it's just something we have to be more and more careful of. The last point that I was going to refer to was the National Protective Security Authority's Trusted Research Evaluation Framework. It's an assessment tool that we are starting to use for due diligence review. And it covers 32 areas of assessment in the UK, certainly for UK universities. It will cover 32 areas of assessment that allows us to determine what kind of security maturity we're at within an institution, and the use of AI and the use of automation and those tools and processes is a big part of how TREF can be applied and how it can be developed from a foundation level up to developed status. So there's probably, what I've said, it seems to be sort of two sides of a coin, but that really is where we are with AI, in the sense that it's a really, really useful tool, and it's very helpful for a lot of universities and in the research compliance space for a lot of what we do. But it also means that a lot of the work that we are assessing wouldn't necessarily be in scope of all this regulation, but AI is bringing it into that scope. And I can pass on to the next person from there.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a good opportunity to bring in Martha, just we can get perhaps an international perspective on this. How many of the points raised have crossed over or resonate with your own experience, or what are the other key points that you think we should be talking about here?
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, so thanks for having me here today. I am in no way, shape, or form any expert in AI. but hopefully I can, as Alistair said, provide some perspective from an administrative role in navigating AI and other sensitive technologies in an uncertain geopolitical time. So I am from the University of Calgary. For those of you who are not aware about the University of Calgary, we are located in Canada, in Alberta, close to the beautiful Canadian Rockies, and we have approximately 30,000 students. We are one of the country's top comprehensive research universities, and we are the top startup creator among Canadian research institutions. We're part of the U15, which is a group of Canada's top research universities, and we're also Canada's entrepreneurial university. We value collaborations that bring exposure to new cutting-edge ideas and lead to innovative discoveries, benefiting local, national, international communities. So my team at the University of Calgary started in 2022. We were actually the third Canadian university that started a research security office here in Canada, and I was the first woman hired. We have 3 pillars to our program. We have education and awareness, we have due diligence, and we have compliance, because we knew that while research security isn't something new, building up capacity and awareness was really a pillar to our program. And in order for people to make informed decisions, that they had to have the information in front of them. So we really worked hard at providing white glove service, as we call it, to make changes across the university and to meet people where they're at. Everyone came at it with a different knowledge, and so building up that capacity was really, really important. And we also know that the researchers know their research better than we do. We know the policies, the procedures, but we don't know the research as well. So we really work collaboratively as a group, and it's a team effort, and that requires ongoing dialogue. The motto at our university is always to get to yes. We want to encourage international partnerships and collaborations, but we need to do it in a safe way. And we also know that people consume information in different ways. So we ensure that we provide information in a variety of ways, be it through lunch and learns, one-on-one discussions, etc. We also have champions across the university who have benefited from making changes to protect themselves. And those shared experiences have helped shape our own program at the University of Calgary. We also know that change can take time, and so, we have to be patient as things evolve and develop along the time. Now, regarding AI, the topic of this webinar, I think it's correct, as was said by our last panelist, that AI poses opportunities and challenges for research. As we spoke about earlier, there's been so many challenges and changes to this. And we need to keep up with those regulations against any civil or military dual use applications. Beyond the potential alarming military applications, there are many potential benefits of AIs, as mentioned before: productivity, healthcare improvements, and transforming the way the economy functions. It's an exciting time for AI research and for governments to build the policies. In Canada, we have new research security requirements for sensitive technology research areas, which also includes AI. So similar to what's happening in the UK, we have our own policies around that, and those were released this May, and it's called the Policy on Sensitive Technology Research and Affiliations of Concern, or STRAC as we like to call it. And this policy aims to safeguard sensitive technology research by identifying and mitigating potential risks posed by affiliations with research organizations that conflict with Canada's national interests. If a researcher is advancing a sensitive technology research area, then they must attest that they are not affiliated with a malign research organization to remain eligible for federal grant funding. The policy applies to the applications to federal granting agencies, which, similar to you, is very fundamental for Canadian researchers to continue to do the work that they do. So this policy is kind of coming into effect right now, and so here in Canada we call it granting season. There's a lot of research grants going on, and so it's the first time that we're going through this policy. Researchers, we find, really appreciate clear and consistent policies and regulations, and so this new policy adds clarity for researchers on our campus communities and has responded positively. The other thing that we always like to talk about is the risk of not moving forward with collaborations. With the proliferation of research requirements in Canada, the US, and allied countries, there's a risk that efforts to safeguard research could be viewed as eradicating barriers to research and international collaborations. So despite the rapid evolution of research security requirements, it's nevertheless the case that open science and international collaborations are essential for driving forward research innovation. As the recent Jason report on research security argues, and Jason is an independent scientific advisory group in the US, limiting research partnerships and international collaborations would be against the national security interests in Canada and like-minded countries. So in other words, it's in the interest of national security to maintain and strengthen international research partners. So rather than limit or restrict global collaborations, I think universities and colleges should be moving forward towards a more risk management approach with a focus on transparency. It's important for international partnerships, but with our eyes wide open so that risks to research integrity can be identified and either mitigated or removed. Education awareness, as I mentioned earlier, are really key proactive mitigating strategies. And it's important that researchers are part of that discussion. Our researchers really feel comfortable coming to us when they're looking at making new collaborations or partnerships because they know that we'll vet the entity and that will work with them to mitigate potential risks. Our goal at the University of Calgary is to get to yes. We need to be creative and entrepreneurial in mitigating risks. So on the one hand, the goal of internalization and research security are often complementary to the extent that safeguarding research is a necessary condition. On the other hand, trying to find the optimal balance between these objectives can be challenging. We work really collaboratively with our international office here to try to achieve this balance. Our collaborations to date have been mutually supportive and have demonstrated the ways in which safeguarding research supports and enables international engagement. Engaging internationally has always required a careful assessment, balancing benefits and risks, but also including risks to the research enterprise by not engaging internationally. So our approach is to foster global collaboration through development of strategic partnerships and networks that emphasize mutual respect and shared goals. Ultimately, universities have to strike a balance between safeguarding sensitive technology research such as AI and simultaneously pursuing the benefit of global collaboration. By adopting a proactive stance characterized by robust research security measures, transparent practices, and strategic international partnerships, universities can protect their research assets while contributing to a collaborative and mutually beneficial global research environment. So I think this approach not only secures valuable information, but also enhances the university's role in advancing knowledge and innovation on a global scale. So again, hopefully that's helpful perspective.
That's great. Thank you, Bob. It's good to have that added extra context. There's I've got some questions for all of the panel, but there's a couple just based on what you've told us. One, I guess, was about getting buy-in. You talked about having to represent the whole culture and the whole community of the university when you start to look at research integrity and research security and managing it in a sensible way. How do you Is there a difference in terms of how you talk to different research stakeholders between the ones who are perhaps quite skeptical about AI and the ones who are very early adopters and want to integrate it very rapidly?
Yeah, well, I think that's the whole point is that you have to meet people where they're at. So everyone comes at it with a different unconscious bias or their own area of expertise. And so they might look at it from one lens, but equally, maybe we don't understand it fully. And so when you're starting to look at a new partner in the area of risk, you have to look at things in a combination of, you have to look at both the area of research and who you're working with. And you have to kind of better understand the practices, like who's in their lab, who's working with them, what they're doing. And you can't just focus in on one or the other because you have to really look at it in the combination, as well as looking at the technology readiness levels and where they are in that commercialization spectrum is really important as well.
Have you found there have been any particular faculties that have been remarkably early adopters to it?
We've been really lucky across the campus community that people just wanted this information. And once it's been presented them in the ways that was most digestible to them, people want to make good decisions. They just didn't always have the information in front of them. So by giving them that and figuring out what's that sweet spot of giving it to them, that's been very helpful.
Okay, great. Thank you. Chaitanya, if I could come to you next, please. You were talking about how this is having an impact on STEM and non-STEM subject areas and the end user concern that you have when you're working with certain countries. Is that having more of an impact on certain area of research than others?
Just checking that I've actually unmuted myself first. Yes, we're seeing more and more that it is having an impact in where academics are working in areas of climate change. So it was a surprise to us, first of all, that you have areas, you've got academics that are working in the kind of geographical science areas of work, which you wouldn't necessarily think are what areas that the government would be necessarily interested in, and that are quite high risk. But we will use, I don't know if people here would have come across the Research Collaboration Advice Team, RCAT, that sit within DCIT, and they are a kind of a bridge between universities and the government. And any project relating to something like, for example, bridge building or climate change and avalanche shearing and things like that, which you wouldn't think are higher risk, but that work being conducted with higher risk nations, we would send those projects to RCAT and they would say, this is something that you probably should refer to the regulator because of who you're working with and their interest in these areas of work would mean that you might need a license. And we would never have thought to go and get licenses for work in those areas before.
Okay, thank you. Eduardo, have you seen diversification as the result of AI becoming available to more researchers?
What do you mean? Sorry, Alistair?
Have you seen a diversification in the adoption of AI as a result of it becoming available to more researchers?
Well, adoption is a very strong word. Okay. And, you know, we collaborate, for example, with many people in different sectors, say, for, you know, in renewable energies. Okay, to integrate, to improve the efficiency of distribution of this kind of energy through the grid. We work with also clinicians, for example, in recognition of medical images, this kind of stuff, and people in fintech, you know, to forecasting for how the market actually goes one direction or another. And there is obviously now an interest by everybody in trying to work with artificial intelligence experts, technologists, in trying to solve the kind of problems they find difficulties with. You know, this is not a secret, but from that to adoption is a huge step. Okay, Alistair. Yes, is so far, for example, working with radiographers in particular in health, from the point in which you demonstrate to them that we can, for example, develop and you know, a medical imaging tool, artificial intelligence, I mean, that can detect and classify correctly, for example, brain tumors with a greater accuracy than a clinician, all right, and radiographer. From that point to the adoption of our technology, you know, by, for example, the NHS is a huge step. Okay. So there is a lot of interest, there is a lot of working together, okay, along the lines, for example, that have been described, you know, by our colleague from Calgary. But from there to adoption, we're not there yet.
Okay, thank you. Leslie, does this perhaps speak to your point of the metaphor you used about the river getting polluted and people having to be cautious in these cases? I was particularly interested in something that you said about producing research-like content. So it would be, that's one of the things that is going to be key in muddying the waters and stopping that final step to adoption. Is that fair to say?
I would agree that's fair to say. I think one of the things that we need to keep, or the angle that I take, is to really understand what should be in good research. And if you understand that, it really doesn't matter whether it was AI generated or it was somebody doing sloppy science. It's not good research. And there are trust markers that we can look for with that. And that's actually a method that we developed to actually use AI for good, to detect the things, not to see what, you know, was something written by AI, but does this information include the information we would expect, the details we would expect to describe and transparently put forth the research in a robust manner. And so those are the things that we look for, because it's really hard to look at research-like content and differentiate between, if you're looking on the AI side, it's hard to differentiate between what was used for purposes, untoward purposes, versus what were used because somebody needed some assistance with their language. You know, those are two different things that may come out with a very similar result if you're just looking for how text was generated. If you're looking for the structure of trustworthy research, then we have tools for that.
And how are the conversations that you're having with your university partners changing when they come to you and say, yes, this is a solution that we need now? Is it because they are skeptical more about the former of sort of research-like content being created in bad faith, or they are dealing with genuine mistakes, like perhaps people leaning into using AI tools too much or just using them in ways maybe not declaring them properly or creating some other confusion?
Yeah, it will be all of the above. And having just returned from Australia, I'll give you a perspective from down under. And that is that, you know, I talked about there being individual motivations, organizational motivations, and geopolitical, but the truth is those end up overlapping whether people want them or not. And an example is that if you look at undergraduates who have been part of buying papers, plagiarized papers, they are then susceptible to being bribed. They're susceptible to being put into networks that they weren't expecting to be in. And as an example, Sydney University was just given a bomb threat and had to close classes because the companies that were the ones that were hired for the plagiarism basically said, if you continue to investigate, you know, we're going to do something against your university. So these lines become very blurred. And hopefully that answered your question with a rather strong example.
Yeah,
but
I wasn't expecting that kind of escalation, really. I mean, Chetan, does that sound something that even if you encountered anything like that before, and you're talking about like, hostile actors and bad actors?
Not directly, but certainly a lot of the forums that we engage with, either internally and externally, these are certainly cases that are coming up and are being used as examples. So this is not a story that I haven't heard before. So thank you for that one. But no, not directly. We've not had to deal with that yet.
And how do you begin to bake in any kind of response to that sort of escalation on an institution-wide level? I mean, how do you? Because these will not be scenarios most people are used to dealing with.
I mean, our processes are already, well, the way that we have set them up, we would hope that they would be able to respond to any situation, whether or not they escalate that far or not. At the ground, the intention is that we are looking at every research project that has a particular level of risk attached to it, and we're using automation and automation processes and AI tools to help us do that, to help us form a risk picture. But the idea is that if we review that level of risk at a very early stage, we would hope that it never has to get that far. Whether that's naive or not, I don't know. But it seems to, touch wood, be working so far.
Okay, great, thank you. Shannon, I wanted to ask about something you touched on earlier about Dimensions has the linked database that aligns with research security professionals. Have those networks and those databases, are they becoming more robust almost by necessity now as they're being tested in so many different ways?
I will say, and just speaking kind of from my perspective, working kind of closely with Dimensions, is that the data was always already there. It was already very robust. It just wasn't really optimized for people doing this type of analysis. And so what really was kind of creating a different lens or a way in which to view this data and navigate it. So it's basically creating an application that's going to unearth those dual affiliations or search the full text of a publication for the mention of possibly a talent program or those kind of sensitive research areas. And it's doing it in a way that, you know, for us is we had a very kind of generalized platform, but we realized our research security users were having trouble finding this data easily and quickly. Dual affiliations are usually very deep within a publication metadata. You have to go into individual publication records. And with something like an application, we can create tables, we can create visualizations that are going to bring this information to the forefront so that, again, we're not telling them what's good or bad, who's good actors or bad actors, but we can at least provide them a little bit of an easier way to navigate all of this kind of messy data that's coming from publications, grants, policies, patents, everything kind of in one easy to use place.
Okay, great, thank you. Eduardo, you mentioned about how the norms and standards are not quite sufficient because of the rate of change that we're experiencing now, and how we need prudence to mitigate AI. Do you see more systems being designed that are serving this purpose? I mean, how is it something that's very difficult to build and stay on top of when the types of threat posed by AI seem to be changing constantly?
I don't think so. To be completely honest, we're actually, working precisely in the normative side. So, okay, if I have expressed precisely talking from an ethical point of view, we're talking about ethics and artificial intelligence of three different approaches that are traditional in ethics. Okay, the first one was about the consequences. Okay, about the users making decisions. Okay, about whether or not something is secure. The second one was precisely the normative one. That is the one that we're trying to implement. We have now the regulations both in the United Kingdom and the European Union, and they have been in place in the States as well, and Australia. But I think that we need a third one. That is what we call virtue ethics, in philosophy. I think we actually need to move, the normative aspects are, of course, we need the standards, professional standards, but at the end of the day, as educators in universities, we need to actually to make sure that the students understand their responsibility, ethical responsibility, and designing systems that align with societal values, not only with professional standards. I think that we are not there. Okay.
And what needs to change in order to get to that point?
Well, I think, okay, that we need to introduce more humanities into STEM. Okay. This is what is something that we are working quite, for example, at City University, City St. George's. Sorry, I forget that we have merged recently, and we changed the name. And I think that we do need to introduce humanities in STEM and to educate the student that is not about. And if we have 1 minute, I wanted to actually to share just one slide with you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, just give me a sec. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, this actually relates to what Leslie was saying, I think. Okay, I was going to use this particular slide in my talk, but I thought, okay, probably it's going to take too long. And it's about this guy over here is Ralph Pulitzer, is the son of Pulitzer, okay, Joseph Pulitzer. And he was giving this talk in Columbia University to the first cohort of journalist students there in 1912. And he actually said, okay, do you want to do business or do you want to do professions? Okay. And here is precisely, was a time that we are repeating, we always repeat history now with artificial intelligence and the fake news. It was a debate between the yellow press at the time and journalism that was not standardized at the time. Okay. And the question was really saying, okay, what is really your purpose? Okay. Do you want just to get money? At the end of the business, as a Nobel Prize said, okay, you might remember him obviously, is Friedman, said business is only about the profit of the shareholders. It's not about values, social values. And then if you are in the, for example, in the newspapers business, you have to entertain because that's what the people want, because you want actually to make a lot of bucks. Okay. Whereas if you are a journalist as a professional, what you want is to inform. Okay, the people actually defending the yellow press kind of approach, okay, to the newspaper said, who's the responsibility? And that's why I started to ask this question, the ethical question. And these people say the responsibility is of the reader. If the reader wants to be informed, they have to check whether the news we produce are true or false. And they actually have this very nice motto, is that is important if true. They say to the readers, if this is true and it's for you actually to figure it out, okay, it's important. It would be important, but we don't know if it's true or not. We just have the news. And all I'm trying to say with this is we translate that into the technology, and artificial intelligence in particular, we actually have to get to this point. Okay, what is really what you want to do? If security is one particular issue we want to address, we want to make sure that we don't have just norms, okay, and standardized in the standardized professions, but people actually align with the values that they should represent in by the cases. Sorry. Probably talking too much.
No, it's fine. It's good to have some extra context in this way. There have been a couple of questions from the audience that I can see that our panelists have kindly answered for us. I mean, I think one thing that I would like to do in the short time that we've got left, rather than ask you to repeat yourself, hopefully everyone can see the questions that have been answered in the chat box, is to perhaps ask the panelists what they think the AI is a notoriously difficult technology to predict because it doesn't move forward in a nice, easy, measurable way. But what they think the ongoing biggest challenge is going to be in order to work with AI effectively, in order to mitigate the challenges to safeguarding and compliance that we're talking about. I mean, Chaitali, you've done an excellent job of explaining the bodies that are in place and the workflows and the best practice that you have in place. Is there anything that you still think needs to change in order to help everyone adopt a kind of floor standard for dealing with AI in a sensible way?
I do think government legislation would be helpful, not so much in the sense that we need more law, because that's not what I'm saying. I mean that it needs to be clearer. And there needs to be something that, whether you're an academic or you're the lawyer interpreting it, that you can understand what government is driving at and what you want us to do to be compliant with these regulations. I also think that, and Martha made this point, no, it's either Martha or Leslie, I'm sorry, I forget, made the point about awareness raising and education. I think that is absolutely fundamental. The more we talk about this with academics, the more, I mean, it's almost every other day I speak with an academic who said, I didn't realize this was a thing. I didn't realize this affected my work. And it doesn't matter how many guidance notes you write or how many marketing things you do. It's a big change for academics, and it's not something they are as fluent in as we want them to be yet. And we're in a period of change, and I think it will come with time. But that education and awareness raising is absolutely key.
Okay, thank you very much. Martha, related to that, sorry, did you want to add to that point?
No, that's fine.
Okay, so whenever anyone unmutes themselves, I'm not sure if I'm picking on you or whether you want to follow them in. But Martha, sorry, I did have a question for you, which was to say, when you are engaging not just with academics, but also external stakeholders, particularly the ones who are perhaps partnering with your people from your own community in order to increase entrepreneurialism and spin outs and things like that, are you speaking to them the same way about AI that you were 6 months ago or a year ago, or has anything changed there in terms of how you are communicating the values and best practice that you have with the external partners that you have at your institution?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think that it's like we do have to work as a community on this. Like when it comes to research and trying to get ahead, it's always been a competition. But now when it comes to things like defining and having legislation around AI and research practices, you have to work as a collaborative, as a team. And here in Canada, we've been really fortunate. Our offices have sprung out across the country, and we've created a Team Canada where we have monthly meetings to share best practices, to share how we're handling these types of difficult situations, like dealing with startups or different companies, as well as we have provinces, just like you have states and different places in the UK. We also work as a provincial legislation. So having streamlined, kind of similar to what Chadi was saying, having streamlined, not like we need more guidance documents, but having streamlined definitions on how to handle these things and guidance to universities, I think is really helpful, because it is that education awareness and people want to make good choices, but there is such interdisciplinary with AI now, and it's so transdisciplinary and working with so many different areas. There's the folks in computer science, there's different people using it for so many different applications, and it's that applications and that potential to use that's the problem. So it's figuring out how we can have those conversations and figure it out, and it really means getting really into the area that it's purposefully being built for, and really honing in on that is really important. And so you can't do that on your own by yourself. You have to work with the people that are either doing the research or commercializing it or what have you. So I guess in that sense is that we're not afraid to work more collaboratively. We have to work with the business units, the chambers of commerces, the governments, and the folks inside, and it can't be just done silo, but collaboratively.
Okay, great, thank you. And related to that point about interdisciplinarity, Eduardo, have you seen any early gains from people working in a more interdisciplinary measure when it comes to deciding how to mitigate and how to utilize AI?
Sorry, I was just reading one question for me in the chat.
Oh, sorry, is there one? Okay, I can't keep up with the different windows. Sorry. Okay. Perhaps if you could, let's have a quick look and see what we've got. Yes, I mean, perhaps I'll read the question out for anyone who hasn't caught it, and then perhaps you could answer in real time. So,
Sure.
one of our members of the audience has asked if Eduardo could comment on how easily AI or machine learning is transferable from one application to another, given that it's so dependent on the data available for any given application.
Exactly.
So are there any sticking points, or is transfer a simple matter?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the hottest topics of research in artificial intelligence, how to transfer knowledge from one from one model to another, and from one specific task to another. That is how to generalize, basically, okay, knowledge, if you wish, from one AI to another. And it's a hot topic because the answer is that we don't know yet. Okay, this is not doable now. This is because of a technical difficulty of the kind of artificial intelligence we are talking about. They can be extremely powerful, for example, GenAI, LLMs, and all that. But all the bottom line, as this technology actually works statistically by finding different data points between interpolating data points between a given data set, okay? They don't extrapolate, and therefore they cannot actually, what you learn in one particular task, you cannot actually extrapolate it or generalize it or transfer the knowledge you have acquired to another one. That's probably the most important problem, challenge we face, technically speaking, in artificial intelligence right now.
Excellent. Thank you very much. We are very tight for time. We have one more question that we can fit in, though, which was the panel's perception of the risks of using publicly available AI or LLMs, for example, Claude or ChatGPT, for research, specifically when research information data is inputted into these systems, because researchers are not always aware of what third-party companies are able to do with data when they do put in these systems. I mean, I think that's a big question to answer in not much time, but Chitali, does that go back to your point about being aware of not just bad actors, I guess, but also what is behind the information that people are looking at when it's AI processed?
Absolutely. And this is something that it's been developing with time, and we're all getting to grips with it as well, because the more and more you find out about it, it's information that's being input by researchers into things like ChatGPT, which are being stored in servers outside of the country. That is technically an export. So we are, just by putting that information into ChatGPT, potentially breaching regulations. I've asked regulators what we do about this, and they don't know. So we are working out as well. So when you go back to your education and your awareness points, is that be very careful of what you're putting into these ChatGPT tools and all these AI tools, not only because you're not sure who has access to them, but you don't know where they're being stored. I don't know how distinctly that, or how specifically that might answer your question, Jonathan, but I hope that gives you an indication of what we're dealing with here.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That takes us to time, I'm afraid, so we have no time for any more questions, but I would like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, Chitali, Martha and Eduardo. It's been really great to get such a variety of experiences and perspectives and pack it all into an hour. Thank you also to Shannon and Leslie and our partners at Digital Science for enabling us to put on these type of events. We hope that you found it as useful and informative as we have. As I said, there will be a full on-demand recording made available to everybody who's registered for today. Please feel free to interact and share with that. We will send out the slides for you when you need them, and we will also send out the link to the article and the takeaways when it's online on the THE website. So thank you all again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Goodbye.